Last night's Jimmy Kimmel Live took a shocking turn when Arnold erupted in fury over Kimmel's relentless political attacks, creating one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history and leaving everyone talking. Jimmy's opening banter seemed harmless enough as he welcomed Arnold with his trademark grin and casual demeanor. However, seasoned viewers could sense an underlying tension in the host's voice, a sharp edge hinting at controversy beneath the surface. Arnold, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, appeared relaxed as he took the guest chair, flashing his famous smile and waving to the enthusiastic crowd. The first few minutes unfolded normally, with Jimmy asking standard questions about Arnold's documentary and his passion for environmental causes. Arnold spoke eloquently about climate change initiatives and the importance of renewable energy, his Austrian accent lending weight to his words. The audience listened intently, clearly captivated by his genuine enthusiasm. Jimmy's demeanor shifted noticeably when Arnold mentioned his bipartisan approach to environmental issues, stressing that climate change should not be a political football. The host's smile grew forced, his posture stiffened, and attentive viewers could see his jaw tighten. What followed would become the defining moment that ignited widespread debate and outrage across the entertainment world. Without warning, Jimmy steered the conversation away from environmental topics and straight into politics. His tone grew more aggressive as he raised Arnold's past support for certain Republican policies. Despite Arnold's well-documented independent stance, the sudden change caught Arnold off guard, his eyebrows lifting in surprise as the questions became increasingly pointed and personal. The studio audience sensed the growing tension, their cheers fading into uneasy murmurs. Arnold initially maintained his composure, trying to redirect the discussion back to his documentary and environmental work. He spoke about unity and cooperation across party lines, his voice steady despite the provocation. But Jimmy pressed on, introducing more controversial subjects and demanding specific political positions unrelated to Arnold's appearance. The questions turned accusatory, delivered with a smirk that suggested Jimmy was enjoying his guest's discomfort. Arnold's famed diplomacy was being tested to its limits. The breaking point came when Jimmy made a snide remark about Arnold's accent, implying that his foreign birth somehow disqualified him from commenting on American politics. The studio fell silent as the words lingered heavily in the air. Arnold's expression changed instantly, his diplomatic smile disappearing as anger flashed in his eyes. The composure that had defined decades of his career began to crack. He gripped the chair's armrests, knuckles whitening as he leaned forward slightly. The audience felt the electricity, sensing something unprecedented was about to happen. Even Jimmy appeared to realize he had crossed an irreversible line, yet his ego kept him from backing down. What followed would be replayed endlessly on social media and dissected by entertainment journalists for weeks. When Arnold finally spoke, his voice carried a warning familiar to anyone who knew his career the calm before the storm. "Jimmy," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that drew the entire studio in. "I came here tonight to talk about saving our planet, about bringing people together for something bigger than politics. But you seem more interested in cheap shots than real conversation." Jimmy's smug expression faltered briefly, but he doubled down, responding with heavy sarcasm. "Oh, come on, Arnold. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking the questions America wants answered. Maybe if you didn't sound like you just stepped off the boat from Austria, people would take your political opinions more seriously." The audience gasped at the blatant xenophobia, with several people audibly expressing shock. Even members of Jimmy's own band exchanged uneasy looks, clearly disturbed by his behavior. But it was Arnold's reaction that truly electrified the room. Rising slowly from his chair, Arnold's imposing 6 feet 2 inches frame loomed over the desk as he locked eyes with Jimmy, his stare intense enough to melt steel. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades spent in public life, from bodybuilding champion to movie star to governor of America's largest state. "Let me tell you something. Jimmy, Arnold began, his accent now adding strength rather than vulnerability to his words. I came to this country with nothing but dreams and determination. I learned English. I built businesses. I worked in Hollywood, and I governed 38 million Californians. I earned my place in American discourse through achievement, not by sitting behind a desk making jokes about people who've actually done something with their lives. The studio audience erupted in applause, many standing in support of Arnold's dignified response. Jimmy, however, flushed with embarrassment and anger at being publicly rebuked. His fragile ego, unable to accept being outmatched by his guest, drove him to escalate further. "Oh, please," Jimmy scoffed, his voice rising defensively. "You're just another Hollywood has-been, trying to stay relevant. Your movie career is over. Your political career ended in scandal. And now you're pushing some environmental nonsense nobody cares about. Face it, Arnold, your 15 minutes ended 20 years ago." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Arnold's jaw tightened as he absorbed the personal attack, a muscle pulsing in his temple as he fought to contain his fury. The audience sat frozen, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would define both men. Even the camera operators seemed to pause, aware they were capturing television history. Arnold stepped closer to Jimmy's desk, his presence completely dominating the smaller man. When he spoke again, his voice carried a menace that reminded everyone why he had been so convincing as an action hero. "You want to talk about relevance, Jimmy? You want to compare accomplishments? I built an empire with my bare hands, while you've spent your career hiding behind writers and mocking people braver than you'll ever be." Jimmy's hands trembled slightly, but he couldn't stop himself from continuing the exchange. "At least I don't have to worry about my housekeeper writing tell-all books about my personal life," he sneered, referencing one of Arnold's past scandals. That was the moment everything changed. Arnold's legendary self-control, the discipline that had carried him through countless challenges, finally shattered. His face hardened with rage as he realized Jimmy had crossed every line of decency. "You pathetic little man," Arnold thundered, his voice booming across the studio and causing several audience members to flinch. "You sit here night after night, hiding behind your desk, tearing down people who have actually built something with their lives. You think mocking my family makes you clever? You think attacking my accent makes you American?" The cameras captured every devastating word as Arnold's fury reached its peak. His massive hands slammed onto Jimmy's desk with such force that the coffee mug jumped, spilling across the host's notes. Jimmy's face drained of color as he realized what he had provoked, his cocky demeanor dissolving under the force of Arnold's anger. "I've made mistakes in my life," Arnold continued, his voice now heavy with experience and achievement. "Yes, but I've owned them, learned from them, and tried to make amends. What's your excuse for being such a miserable excuse for a human being? What drives you to attack people who come on your show in good faith?" The audience was completely silent, transfixed by the raw power of the moment. Several people in the front rows raised their phones, instinctively aware they were witnessing something that would be remembered for years. Jimmy tried to regain control, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "Arnold, let's just calm down," he stammered, finally grasping the seriousness of the situation. "This is just television. We're just having a conversation." "A conversation?" Arnold laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with contempt. "You call xenophobic attacks and personal insults a conversation? You wouldn't recognize a real conversation if it bit you in your sorry behind. You've spent so long mocking people that you've forgotten how to be a human being." The production crew stood frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or allow the historic confrontation to continue. Producers frantically gestured from the wings, yet no one seemed willing to interrupt what had become the most gripping television in decades. Arnold's righteous fury was mesmerizing, a masterclass in controlled anger from someone who had faced real challenges in life. Jimmy's desperation grew, increasingly obvious as he realized his career might be unraveling in real time. His usual smugness gave way to panic as he attempted to retreat from his earlier attacks. Look, Arnold, maybe I went too far with some of those comments. This show is supposed to be fun, entertaining. Fun. Arnold's voice rose another octave, his Austrian accent now adding gravitas rather than vulnerability. You think destroying people's dignity is fun? You think mocking immigrants is entertaining? Let me tell you what's fun. It's Jimmy. Fun is building something meaningful with your life instead of tearing others down for cheap laughs. The former governor stepped even closer to the desk, his imposing presence completely overwhelming the smaller host. Jimmy pushed his chair back slightly, clearly intimidated by Arnold's physical dominance and moral authority. The power dynamic in the studio had fully shifted, with the supposed host now resembling a cowering child being scolded by an angry parent. You want to know the difference between us, Jimmy? Arnold continued, his voice settling into a deadly calm that was somehow more frightening than his earlier shouting. I came to America to build dreams. You built a career on crushing them. I've inspired millions of people to believe in themselves. You've made millions feel small and worthless just to make yourself feel better. The audience began to murmur, many nodding in agreement. Several voices could be heard saying, "That's right," clearly siding with the guest over their supposed entertainer. Jimmy's own audience was turning against him in real time. And everyone in the studio could feel it. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to regain control, his voice trembling as he tried to assert authority. "This is my show, Arnold. I think maybe we should wrap this up and move on to the next segment." Arnold's response became the most quoted line of the entire confrontation, delivered with devastating finality. "Your show." His voice carried a mix of contempt and pity that cut through Jimmy like a blade. "This isn't a show anymore, Jimmy. This is a public execution of your own character, and you're holding the gun. You've just shown America exactly who you are, and it's uglier than any movie villain I've ever played." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the studio, from the audience to the crew, understood they had just witnessed something historic. Jimmy's face cycled through anger, embarrassment, fear, and finally, resignation as the magnitude of his mistake set in. Arnold straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements dignified, even in fury. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decades spent facing adversity and emerging stronger. "I came here tonight to talk about saving our planet's future. Instead, I've witnessed the moral bankruptcy of someone meant to entertain families across America." He turned to the audience, his commanding presence filling the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who lift people up instead of tearing them down. You deserve entertainment that brings out the best in humanity, not the worst." The audience erupted into sustained applause, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation for Arnold's dignity and moral courage. The sound overwhelmed Jimmy's weak attempts to regain control. Several audience members shouted words of support and agreement. Jimmy made one final attempt to salvage the moment, his voice barely audible over the applause. "Arnold, come on. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. We can work this out." Arnold's laugh was sharp and final. "Work this out? Jimmy, there's nothing to work out. You've shown your true colors tonight, and they're not pretty. I've dealt with studio executives, politicians, and critics my entire career, but I've never encountered someone so fundamentally lacking in basic human decency." The former governor began walking toward the exit, his powerful stride carrying him away from the toxic environment Jimmy had created. But he wasn't finished delivering his verdict on the host's behavior. Turning back one final time, Arnold delivered the coup de grace that would shatter Jimmy's credibility. "You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy? You had a platform to inspire people to bring joy into their lives, to make a positive difference in the world. Instead, you chose to use it to feed your own petty insecurities and cruel impulses. That's not just unprofessional. It's a betrayal of every person who trusted you with their time and attention. The camera lingered on Jimmy's face as the words landed, revealing a man who finally grasped the enormity of his mistakes. His familiar smirk had vanished, replaced by the hollow look of someone watching his career collapse in real time. The audience's applause swelled even louder, making their sympathies unmistakably clear. Arnold paused at the edge of the stage, his final words carrying across the studio with unmistakable clarity. "I've terminated a lot of bad guys in my movies, Jimmy, but I've never seen someone terminate their own reputation so efficiently. Congratulations, you've managed to destroy in one night what took you years to build." With that devastating conclusion, Arnold walked off the set with his head held high, leaving behind a stunned silence broken only by scattered applause from audience members who recognized his principled stand. Jimmy remained frozen behind his desk, visibly shell-shocked by the complete dismantling of his credibility and authority. Producers scrambled to cut to commercial, but the damage was already irreversible. Within minutes, social media exploded as clips of Arnold's response spread rapidly across every platform. The hashtag #ArnoldDestroysJimmy began trending worldwide within the hour, accompanied by widespread praise for Arnold's dignity and sharp condemnation of Jimmy's conduct. By morning, Jimmy's ratings had fallen to historic lows, while interest in Arnold's documentary surged dramatically. The confrontation drew a stark contrast between a man who built his life on achievement and integrity and one who built his career by tearing others down. The entertainment industry was left with a powerful reminder of the value of respect and professionalism. Professionalism delivered both, even under extreme provocation.